Hello, this is Hylland Eriksen speaking to you from Gladstone, Queensland, where I'm still on fieldwork looking at local responses to accelerated change. Now I've taken the car about 15-20 minutes out of the city, due north to a place called Fisherman's Landing, which is a bit of a misnomer really, because no fisherman has landed here for many years. It's been an industrial wharf for quite some time, with key factories such as Cement Australia's factory, the chemical factory Orica, and the controversial shale oil factory nearby. Fisherman's Landing has recently also become known for being a main port for shipping people and materials and other stuff across to Curtis Island, where the 3 new LNG, liquid natural gas plants, have been built, or are still being built, but they're going to be completed probably by the end of 2014. Now, the reason I've taken you here is to show you something and tell you a story about the Bund wall. The Bund wall, what on earth is it? Well, a Bund wall is a wall that is being built to contain dredge spoil. The dredging of Gladstone Harbour, which I spoke about in a previous video blog, obviously required disposal of the dredge spoil somewhere. It couldn't be disposed of. It was too much to be disposed of just in the open sea. It was too expensive, the Ports Corporation argued, to dispose of it on land, which might have been the most sustainable thing in environmental terms. So instead one built a huge structure. As far as I can see, it's a huge structure. I'll show it to you in a minute. Meant to contain the dredge spoil and to avoid it from spilling into the surrounding sea and contaminating it. So this Bund wall was built, and most of the dredge spoil was put into it. Now let's go outside and have a look at it. The reason I'm sitting inside the car is that it's a bit windy today, and it has an adverse effect on the sound quality. But let's have a look at the Bund wall. There it is. Zooming in a bit on it now. So you can see it's a fairly large structure built of rock and sand and silt and mud, and in the middle of the Bund wall there is a geotextile sort of cloth that is meant to prevent the dredge spoil from spilling into the surroundings. Now the green hills you can see in the background are part of Curtis Island, so you can tell that, the Narrows actually is appropriately named. It's a narrow strait that separates the island from the mainland. We can also see some clumps of mangrove trees, mangrove being a wonderful kind of plant which is environmentally important and which has the capacity of growing in salt water, as you would know. Now it is protected. Mangrove is protected, so if I were to break off a branch of mangrove, for example, because I needed it in connection with my fishing, I might get a fine. But if hectares upon hectares of mangrove are destroyed because of dredging of the harbour, there are no sanctions. And this leads to some resentment among some people who feel that the law should be the same for everybody. Well, now that we've had a look around a bit, now there's a bit of the industry, you see, in the area, we can go back into the car and I'll just tell you a short version of the story about the Bund. Right, so here we are. Now there are many stories about the Bund wall, but the story I'd like to tell is this. It should be sealed, and because of this layer of geotextile, it should be guaranteed that it was safe, that nothing of the dredge spoil should spill into the surrounding sea and lead to contamination of it, because everybody knew that there was stuff in the silt and mud that was being dredged up that probably would be better off, not becoming part of the surrounding sea. Yet, even at an early stage, aerial photographs showed that there was a vast plume of brownish muddy water spilling out from the Bund wall and into the Great Barrier Reef area, actually. Well, not quite as far as the reef, which is far from the coast, this far south. It starts about 40 kilometers from the coast. Further up at Port Douglas and Mackay you can almost stand on the beach and throw pebbles at the reef, well, not quite, but it's much nearer. So it's far out. But it spread out, this brownish plume. Yet at the same time, the authorities, the Ports Corporation and others insisted that it was everything had been done according to the book and that it was sealed. So in other words, the knowledge of observation and of experience contradicted the knowledge or the information given by the authorities, which led to a certain distrust, a certain wariness, a certain cynicism in some segments of the population who cared about the water quality of their port and about the honesty of the people who were in charge. Just a few months ago, as I speak, this would have been in January 2014, a couple of the engineers who were involved in building the Bund wall came out as whistleblowers and told the Brisbane newspaper, the Courier Mail, that things had not been done in an appropriate way. Corners had been cut in order to save money and time, and the geotextile fabric was in fact a bit of a scandal, they said. The fabric used was inferior, and it had not been placed in a correct way inside the Bund wall. So it started to tear, it started to leak very soon. They also had photographic evidence to show this. Now, what does the Ports Corporation do, which was in charge of building the Bund wall, when confronted with this evidence? They set up a commission. So as I speak, in March 2014, environmentalists, they would say, "We told you so." Members of the concerned public would say, "Why didn't you tell us if you knew?" Because someone would have known, not just those two engineers, and why didn't they tell us? And the Ports Corporation says, "Wait until the end of April, because we will then have an independent report." Now the independence of that report is already being questioned, and engineers have asked why there is no one with an engineering competence on the committee. Since this was an engineering project, that may be seen to be a relevant question. So here we are, with a fascinating situation for an anthropologist interested in power and knowledge and decision-making processes, a frustrating situation for members of the civil society who feel that they have been misled again by authorities, and who can invoke this as evidence that whenever financial, economic interests are involved, if they're big enough, all other considerations take second place. The guy who mentioned breaking off a branch because he needed it in connection with his crab pots or fishing, and could be fined for it. Whereas the big corporations can destroy hectares upon hectares of mangrove without there being any sanction. He may have had a point, but we'll look into that at a later stage. So far, the story about the Bund wall, it somehow fits nicely. It fits like a piece in the jigsaw that I'm beginning to lay from my fieldwork in Gladstone, because there are other stories that resemble it. And in the next video blog, I'm going to tell you another story, which is perhaps a bit more dramatic, from the same area, which resembles the story about the Bund wall, but with even more dramatic consequences for the people affected.